every woman, when they have a baby, complains that their husband never wakes up if the baby cries. I think they even did a study on it where they found that, I think they even did a study, where men won't wake up if a baby cries or child calls, but men will wake up if they hear a sound in the house that sounds like an intruder or
that makes sense.
Something tapping on the window.
They need to rest for hunting and then...
Yeah, but exactly. So I think they even did a study on that. I think as a woman we are, and I know that this is probably going to be something that a lot of people disagree with, but I think that women are hardwired from an evolutionary point of view to be nurturing and caring and look after babies. And so I'm not saying that that's the only thing that they can do. Definitely not. I'm just saying that we have an instinct to do it, and we have an instinct to do it well. So from an evolutionary point of view, if women are hardwired to nurture and to care for children, and now on top of it, we've had the privilege of getting fantastic educations and then having work opportunities and wanting to be financially independent, and we achieve all of that, and then we still hit 30 or 32 or 35 and suddenly decide we actually desperately want a baby and we want family. We then go for that too, and then we land up in a position where we expect ourselves, society too, but we expect ourselves to then work, have an amazing career, raise our children, be the perfect mothers, be the perfect wife. Like, I think in some ways, and then I think women land up overloaded.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So,
and the question is, are they happier then with just fulfilling that stereotypical
I think they
mother role, right?
Happier, I don't know. I think that they probably I think being a mother is probably the hardest job you can do, and I think doing it full time is incredibly difficult, and I think nowadays probably quite lonely, just because we don't live in communities and we don't live in villages and we don't have extended family around. So I think it's potentially probably the hardest job you can do, and quite isolating and quite challenging. It's also like this whole new world that you're thrown into of parenting and caring and nurturing, and it's very giving. Like, you don't sure, you get something back from your children, of course you do, you get that beautiful connection and you get those amazing moments, but at the same time also just fucking hard work. And so I think women nowadays, if they're full-time moms, I think that can be quite lonely and quite isolating. I don't think it's necessarily this amazing, joy-filled, everyday happiness. And I think it can potentially be quite a lonely time for women. But, okay, flip side of that is a woman who has a career and is now concerned once she has a baby that if she doesn't go back to work full-time, she's going to potentially lose her career projections and her income, and
which is true.
It's a valid
concern, yeah.
Right. So she may choose to go back to work, say, after, if she's lucky, 3 months of maternity leave, right? Whether that's paid or not depends on the country. So I know in South Africa there's like no paid maternity leave, like it's up to the employer. Switzerland, I don't know what it's like. But anyway, so she might go back to some kind of work, probably full-time, right? And then she sits with the guilt, right, of like not caring for her child full-time and not being there for her child.
Doing two things but nothing right in a way.
Exactly. And then so she's also then under pressure at work to still perform and to not be seen as this sort of woman who has just lost her identity to becoming a mother. So she still has this expectation to perform her work brilliantly, to not be taking time off for work.
we talked about that it is indeed not a concern which is relevant because that's the situation, right? If you go on a break for 5 years, there is a valid concern that if you have one child or if you have even two children, right, then it becomes even worse, quote unquote, right? Because you have, maybe 1 or 2 years of a gap. So then that's 5 years, 7 years out of your profession, out of your job. And there is a valid concern around: will you be able to go back? Will you not be replaced? Will you be up to date in terms of the knowledge that you have and everything, right? So I think it's not at all invalid to have these concerns as a mother that's working, right?
Yeah. But so it's just, I think also my point is that women, we want it all. We've technically now got it all, right? But like, have we sort of bitten off more than we can chew? Because, we expect ourselves to work hard, have a career, earn money, be amazing mothers that are emotionally present and nurturing and endlessly patient and perfect. We expect ourselves to be these sort of good wives or perfect wives. And I think it's really, really difficult to juggle it all. And sorry, that goes back to my original point about evolution, and I think that from an evolutionary point of view, we as women are hardwired to nurture and to care. And I think not that men can't do it and not that men don't do it, they do, but it's such a strong internal drive for us women that when we force ourselves to work and achieve those other goals, which are worthy goals, and I think that women should absolutely have the right to those things and absolutely pursue those things. But I'm just saying that it comes at a cost, because we land up sort of burning the candle on both ends in terms of career and giving to our children. And I think women land up very depleted and quite sort of burnt out. Women that work in particular. And I think that we constantly feel judged by society, whether we choose to work or we choose to stay at home. Yep. So, I had the privilege of staying at home with my girls when they were babies for 8 months because I had my own business and I could get somebody in to sort of cover my position for a while. And I knew that I could go back to it. And I was very lucky that I could go back to my work part-time. And I'm really, really grateful for that. But a lot of women don't have that. So,
and to be fair, like a lot of women also don't have the means to get a nurse, get a nanny, work half-time. Like often if you have families where there is a dependency on the second income of the woman.
Absolutely.
That's becoming more and more common, especially now that economic
cost of living so high.
Times are changing.
Yeah. So anyway, I think it's the reality of modern day living that women are in the workforce. And I think that women make a really valuable contribution. But I also think it's part of the reason why women are having less children.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. First of all, they're financially independent. So I think a lot of them aren't even getting married because, why do you need to get married? And then second of all, if you do, and not that you have to be married to have children, but that sort of traditional family unit, right?
Get married, not being financially independent and not having
to
not be married, right?
Having to be married.
Not like in the past where we're dependent on the breadwinner, farmer, bringing the food on the table.
Yeah.
But one interesting aspect, I think that you didn't discuss, and that's me talking as a male, is also the toll it takes on partnerships.
The toll it takes on partnerships,
yes,
in what way?
You were saying it takes a toll on the woman.
Yeah.
This double, kind of the overload of having to take care of the kids and the job at the same time, and then being stressed out. But also, I think one of the reasons why a lot of relationships fail, and certainly there's something that I felt in my failed marriage, is that when you have so many things going on at the same time, the relationship just suffers. And if a relationship suffers from lack of, say, time to attend to your partner, that can very quickly lead to a failed marriage, a failed partnership, right? And that then in turn can again cause more pressure, more issues, because then you don't have double income anymore. Then you need to be the sole breadwinner. So you have, as a woman, then you have to earn your own money in other cases. So I think the whole impact of this dual mother and working role on partnership should not be forgotten about, discounted for it.
I mean, I think in couples where both partners are working and they've got children, I think there's discussions around who's responsible for what, and are really difficult and really fraught discussions.
Yeah, of course, because then you have like this, okay, so you're responsible for, let's say, the home, just to stay within the stereotypes.
Yeah, are you talking about like if they're both working? Or
if they're both working, right? And then it's like, so wait a second, as a woman, why should I be responsible for the home? I'm also working full time, so why
should I be responsible?
Why me, not you, right?
For the kids, and why should I be the one waking up for the kids, and why should I be the one? So I think that when both partners are working, so that this goes back to my initial point, where I think women naturally take on more of that nurturing role and more of that role taking care of the kids. And certainly that was the case for me. I mean, yes, I wasn't working full time, but I was working a lot. But I kind of became solely responsible for the kids almost. And because my ex-husband was traveling a lot, like that very much became my role. And even working part-time, but full-time looking after the kids is a lot to take on, And so I agree with you. I think it does put a huge stress, especially those early years of childhood, as beautiful as they are.
You have to
back at them, I mean, they're probably some of our happiest years, but
until they're like
in a relationship.
5 or 6 years old, like you have to attend to them constantly, right?
Yeah.
Once they reach a certain age, and it's like, okay, they can kind of, they can get their own food out of the fridge, they can go to the restroom on their own, they can, kind of entertain themselves for a while. But until like they're like 4 or 5, I mean, it's cute that they like the ages between 2 or 4.
Adorable.
I think probably the cutest age for a kid ever.
Really,
but it's like fucking exhausting, right? Because you constantly entertain the little humans, and and as I say, then especially if you're working, even if you're working from home. I mean, I see it now when I have the kids. During my part of the week, it's like, you can't get shit done, right? It's like this, I need this, I need that. Can you help me with that? I need some homework. I'm hungry. This hurts. I would say one very important part, that is, I can speak to that, is you need to talk to each other, right? Because that's probably something that's, in my previous relationship, I did not do well enough. That's also something we did very intentionally from the beginning. Like starting our relationship, we would say, okay, what does it mean? Like, what are all the different areas of life that are important to us?
But the problem is that you can talk about something as much as you like. When the reality happens, and you become parents, there's a certain physiology and a certain evolutionary thing that kicks in. And quite frankly, your kids become your first priority, your babies become your first priority. And I think that's natural. And from an evolutionary point of view, it's quite natural. So yes, you can talk about these things beforehand. You can't anticipate the coming change, I don't think.
That is true. But talking about the reality of this potentially happening or very likely happening, and then kind of having an idea, okay, so if that happens, and as you say, it's very likely to happen, what do we then do, right? Because you can't switch off evolution or genetics or biology. But what you can do is to say, hey, okay, look, yes, the kids are a priority for the mother. And yes, they take some sort of evolutionary, emotional, spiritual, whatever priority over the partner. But knowing that, what can we do to still keep the relationship healthy and happy? Like, what can we do to then plan moments together? We say, okay, it's a conscious decision, like the typical date night thing, right? We say, okay, let's take the time for ourselves and for the relationship to, even though yes, the kids are priority number one, and it's not going to go away, to then take some partner time, like even if it's in a reduced amount compared to what it was before, but at least there's a conscious effort to keep the partnership alive and active. And I think that's very important.
Yeah, I agree 100%. And I agree. I think the open, honest communication about it, and also, I think it's also about managing expectations. Managing expectations of your partner, managing expectations of being realistic about what it means to have kids. And quite frankly, I look at some couples and I think you guys really shouldn't have children. Like, the reality is that you're both just too selfish, or one of you is just too selfish to be able to make the necessary compromises that are required of having kids. So yeah, let's go.
So in what way shouldn't have kids?
In what way?
Yeah, like what?
You meet some couples, right? I mean, I've met couples before, and like, I can think of one example where the guy had 2 kids from a previous relationship. She'd been involved with the kids from when they were little. So you'd think she had a pretty good idea of what was involved. He was pretty wealthy. He wanted to live his life, have fun, go on his yacht, fly wherever he wanted to, whenever he wanted to. He had his own very successful business. And she was in her 30s, I guess, when they met. And then her biological clock just kicked in, and she went from not really wanting to have kids. She was perfectly happy with the fact that he had 2 girls that she'd been involved with. And she hit 35.
Very urgently having kids, right?
Urgently wanted to have her own baby. And it just became a non-negotiable in their relationship. And he said, I don't want any more kids. And she was like, well...
So he did have kids already?
He had kids already before, and she had helped in a way to raise them. And yeah, she just insisted she wanted her own baby. And so they had a baby. The baby was born prem, first of all, which was a huge challenge. And then the baby was sick, often. Huge challenge.
Oh, no, yeah.
And it initially, in the early years, besides the baby being very sick, they could make it work because she wasn't in school, and they could still travel wherever and live a very nice lifestyle. And yes, the baby just fitted into whatever they were doing, wherever they were going, etc. But after about 4 years, their relationship fell apart. They now live in different countries. I mean, he absolutely loves his baby daughter, but he never wanted another child. He wasn't really willing to commit and father that daughter the same way that he had his first 2 children. And so, you land up with this broken relationship and this broken...
Yeah, this way.
This broken relationship. Like, the 2 of them should not have had children together. I don't think, because they just wanted such different things from their lives and
had different expectations.
Expectations, and there he was very clear about what he was and wasn't willing to give and to do, and she just kind of overrid that. and it all ended up falling apart. You know what I mean? So I think we've all met couples where we sort of think, this is a disaster waiting to happen if they do have chickens. Look at chickens. The chickens are hiding.
They're hiding, yeah. They've had enough.
Oh, shame.
As we said, it wasn't a matter of not communicating because he clearly stated he didn't want it.
Yeah.
But it was a matter of mismatched expectations in one part and not respecting the ideas,
wishes of the other,
emotions, feelings of the other person, right?
Oh. I mean, I think it's a clear example of where, you know, it's one thing if you want to have a baby on your own, but if you want to be a couple and have a child and be together, then
it's a decision you make together.
Yeah, then that's the decision that they've made together, right? Or that's the decision that the person who decides to have the baby has made, right? You know, it's a bit like that friend of your guys who had a baby.
Yeah, and against the specific will of the partner at the time, right? Where she said, "Oh, this relationship's going nowhere, but I want." Should we go this way?
Yeah.
I want a child.
Yeah.
Come whatever may, right?
Yeah. But I think she took that decision knowing that he would probably leave.
Oh yeah, I'm pretty sure, because they knew that the relationship isn't going too well.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And yet she lands up with isn't her child mentally disabled?
Somewhat, yeah.
Yeah.
I know the English term for it, but she, against his will, made sure she got pregnant. Knowing the relationship's going nowhere. Also, not even trying to fix the relationship. Well, not even. Because some people try to fix a relationship by getting a kid, which is about as stupid. But now she's a single mom stuck with a mentally challenged kid. Does not have a partner, because also the reality is at a certain age, with being a single mother, dramatically reduces your available dating pool. That's just the reality. It's not, no judgment in there. And she's struggling financially, absolutely. And so I think that's the other side. But yeah, what do I think? Look, a horse.
Such a pretty horsey. Hello. Hello, horsey. Oh, hi. What's this? This is a drone. Yes, you don't like it. It's okay. Oh, they don't like. Shame. Okay. White one's so beautiful. It's like they're curious, but they don't like it.
Why is this bird so loud? Yeah, so what does one do about it? I mean, as you just said, life happens, and you can plan all you want. Things can just fall apart. But that being said, I think just having clarity on both ends and really having the uncomfortable discussions around these edge cases where you say, okay, what would happen if, you know, I want a child, you don't want a child. I want to work, you don't want to work. I do work, I don't want to work. I want to have my career, I don't want to have my career. What happens if, for whatever reason, this happens or doesn't happen, right? What does it mean to a relationship? And I think if you at least have an idea in advance that you say, okay, well, if that would happen, that would be the end of it. Then I mean that's a piece of information you can then use whatever way you want, but at least you know you have at least discussed it and know what the other partner would expect, so it doesn't come as a surprise if it then falls apart. So
do you think people have those discussions?
I don't think people. I think a lot of people avoid these discussions because they're uncomfortable. Right? It's like, let's probably talk about in another recording, but like now having just how many people take the time after they've met and after it becomes clear that there is something to the relationship that's more than just a short-term flirt. How many people then take the time to sit down and say, okay, here are all the areas of life which are relevant for us, whether it's family, whether it's business, whether it's sex, whether it's emotional stuff, whether it's spirituality, whether it's whatever, religion or not, whether it's whatever it is, and then sit down and go through all these things, as unsexy as it is, and really say, okay, here's my point of view, here's your point of view. How do we match up? How do we don't match up? And if we don't match up, what does it mean? And
what
I don't think
negotiables, what are the non-negotiables?
Exactly right. And what's so non-negotiable that it be a breaking point, right?
Yeah.
Because it doesn't make sense to say, okay, that's non-negotiable, but let's still try it. Because if that then happens or it doesn't happen, then what's going to happen to the relationship? It's going to fail anyway, right? So, and no, I don't think people take the time, unfortunately. And a lot of people do not want to have to expose themselves, probably also in a lot of these aspects, by opening up about what it really is that they want, right?
No, I absolutely agree with you. And I think so often I think you're right. I think we avoid the uncomfortable conversations, but I think that we as humans also have this idea about love that it solves all of these problems.
Yeah.
And that if you love somebody enough, you don't have to have these hard discussions, and that somehow love is this magic panacea that's just going to soothe everything.
Fix everything,
yes. Make everything bearable, whether it's love for your partner, love for your children, that it just makes all of these problems so much easier to deal with. And I think love can be an incredible panacea, but I think the reality is that love can only go so far. And I think it's incredibly valuable to have these discussions. But I think also we all assume that, I don't know if we all assume, but I think that we sometimes assume that other people have the same expectations, or other people have the same values, or or our partner has the same values, or that they understand how we feel about something without having to necessarily expressly say it.
Yeah.
And so it's about these sort of unmet expectations, or these conversations that you've never really had, that you may have alluded to things, or you may have hinted at something. But
or you made assumptions about the others, about your partner's mental states, emotional states, right?
Absolutely. So I think we do that all the time. And I think that it becomes like the subtitles to your relationship. You maybe not necessarily, you don't know what the person's thoughts are, but you're kind of reading the subtitles. So, you kind of looking at body language, or you're reading between the lines, or you think that you understand when really you don't understand. Or maybe it's like, maybe a better analogy is that it's like listening in a language you don't fully understand. Watching a movie where you
kind of get the gist of the idea, but you don't really fully understand
the sort of nuance, or the sort of real depth of
what's being said.
Yeah. So
that's a really great analogy. I like that.
Yeah. And I think that leads to a lot of unhappiness, because, for example, you may think that you have the same, and also when those things shift and change, you've also then got to revisit those conversations. You can't just think that you can have these conversations once,
absolutely,
and it's a done deal, right? Because we all change and we grow up.
Life changes.
Yeah, absolutely. And situations change, and what's important to you changes, and when we get older, our hormones change. I mean, all of these things happen, right?
Health changes.
Yeah, your kids change.
Jobs change, kids changes.
Yeah. So life is constantly changing, and so I think you've got to constantly have these conversations. And maybe that goes back to the idea of quality time and prioritizing a relationship, regardless of how
what
your
circumstances
have changed. Yeah. So, and I think if you can keep prioritizing each other, even if you don't always love each other, but I think if you can prioritize each other and say, right, I'm gonna make an effort to connect, to see where this person's at, to understand where this person's coming from, to, you know, understand how things have shifted and changed for them. And, you know, I think that that's so important. And I think it can go a long way to helping a relationship stay strong and healthy, rather than assuming that you know what's on that person's mind, or assuming that things are the same, or I think
that's
you know what's going on.
Kind of the summary. That's assumptions kill relationships in many cases.
Totally. And unmet expectations, I think, kill relationships.
So if you enjoyed this video, let us know what you should talk about next. Please don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you in the next forest walk, river walk. Let's see where we're going.
Yeah, let's see where life takes us.
Bye.